Urgent, Russia has declared war on migrants, a hunt for foreigners, and the collapse of the multinational empire. New expulsions from ethnic neighborhoods and mass deportations. Medvedev against enclaves. Now people are being thrown out of Russia even for bad test results. 20 articles for instant expulsion. The Ministry of Internal Affairs introduces a one-way ticket. On top of that, racism in the State Duma. Deputies call migrants a threat and demand to revoke work permits for being poor. But it gets worse. A Siberian-Korean gulag in the center of Russia, slave labor in containers infested with cockroaches, and a death rate 4 times higher than normal. Welcome to the channel Ukraine Today. Why has the prestige of the Russian passport fallen by a third, and Russian brides are switching en masse to Indian grooms? Where did the local Ivans disappear to? And how is the Kremlin turning the country into a punched camera of xenophobia? My name is Andrei Silakov. Let's look at all the hot facts right now. Let's start with the main thing. Dmitry Medvedev has officially declared war on ethnic enclaves, calling them hotbeds of radical ideas and crime that prevent foreigners from obeying Russian laws.
We will also discuss counteracting the formation of ethnic enclaves on Russian territory. This topic is highly resonant. It is widely discussed and written about. The issue undoubtedly requires special attention. The compact settlement of foreigners usually, in any country by the way, not just ours, in any country, it does not contribute to their adaptation.
Medvedev is demanding not just control but a radical purge. The new migration policy concept up to 2030 essentially legalizes the fight against any compact settlement of newcomers. The Kremlin sees these communities as a direct threat to its stability and intends to eliminate them by all available means. In addition to police measures, the authorities are introducing a medical filter. Foreigners with any dangerous diseases are planned to be expelled from the country immediately. The deputy chairman of the Security Council is personally insisting on the urgent adoption of laws so that deportation on health grounds becomes instantaneous and leaves no alternatives. Now, any medical certificate in Russia can turn into a sentence, making medicine yet another tool for mass purges of those deemed unreliable. The Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs has prepared a package of amendments that turns a migrant's life into an endless survival quest under the threat of deportation. The agency proposes to expel foreigners for 20 types of offenses, including participation in unauthorized rallies, strikes, or even abuse of freedom of mass information. If before you could get away with just a fine, now the system is set up for a total purge. Minor hooliganism or disobeying the police now guarantees an instant one-way ticket out. Among them are
violating emergency regime requirements, participating in the activities of foreign organizations, or participation in an international undesirable organization, taking part in unauthorized rallies, coercing someone to join or refuse to join a strike. In addition, a number of articles in the Administrative Code introduce new types of offenses specifically for foreigners. For example, for minor hooliganism involving disobedience to the police and for distributing TV programs and films that influence the subconscious. Publication in the media, instructions for assembling bombs, and offers for remote alcohol sales. It is proposed that such individuals be expelled from the country.
Digital surveillance is also reaching a new level. In Moscow and the surrounding region, mandatory transmission of geolocation data through mobile applications is being introduced under threat of expulsion. Law enforcement no longer hides the fact that migration flows are merely a pretext for them to intensify xenophobic violence and boost their reporting statistics. At the same time, fines for foreigners have skyrocketed, bringing a record 5.5 billion rubles to the budget in just 1 year, turning repression into a profitable state business.
In 2025, the authorities repeatedly tightened the requirements for foreigners staying in Russia. For example, they launched a registry of controlled persons for those who break the law. Being included in this registry threatens with account blocks and deportation from the country. And in Moscow and the Moscow region, migrants were required to share their geolocation via a mobile app under threat of deportation.
In the corridors of Russian power, they no longer hesitate to display blatant racism. Deputy Mikhail Matveyev publicly calls the recruitment of workers from Afghanistan a huge mistake, claiming that they supposedly only know how to shoot a Kalashnikov rifle.
This, he says, is due to their mentality, temperament, and religious intolerance, and so on. In my opinion, people from Afghanistan, unfortunately, do not possess any special skills, except for the ability to shoot a Kalashnikov rifle since childhood.
The parliament is passing laws that allow people to be expelled even for discrediting the army or calling for sanctions. Any attempt by a foreigner to express an opinion in Russia is now equated with extremism. Economic pressure has become no less cynical. The State Duma is considering annulling patents for everyone whose income is below the subsistence minimum. In other words, if you are not rich enough for the Kremlin, you have no right to be there. At the same time, they want to extend taxes and advance payments to all members of a migrant's family, turning their lives into legalized financial slavery.
According to the initiative, labor migrants will have their patent or work permit annulled if their income is less than the regional subsistence minimum, calculated for each family member. In addition, the tax in the form of a fixed advance payment for foreigners will be extended to all members of migrant families. The period of a labor migrant's stay in Russia will be tied to the duration of their employment relationship with them.
Within 1 year, migrants will be required to work for at least 10 months. And
It's no wonder why the reputation of Russian citizenship has hit rock bottom. The number of people wishing to obtain a Russian passport has plummeted by almost 30% in a year. People are massively rejecting the double-headed eagle, unwilling to become part of a pariah state. But the Kremlin has found a replacement: slave labor from North Korea. Human rights activists describe the living conditions of these workers as worse than Animal Farm.
they have to work 16 hours a day almost without any days off. The government takes most of their earnings and they have to live in unheated, overcrowded containers infested with cockroaches. They can't leave or change jobs because they are under constant surveillance, and their passports confiscated.
For Pyongyang, this is a great business since the government takes half of the workers' salary and Russian employers cut costs wherever they can. The mortality rate at sites with North Korean workers is 4 times higher than the industry average because of total disregard for safety. This is a real 21st century gulag in the heart of Russia. North Korean construction workers in Russia. This is a vivid illustration of how the Putin regime exploits hopelessness. After 3 to 4 years of backbreaking labor, he manages to save up enough money to start a small business and dramatically improve his standard of living. It is precisely for this illusory chance at a normal future that people agree to work night shifts and live in inhumane conditions, while Kremlin propaganda talks about protecting human rights. Such an economic model, based on forced labor and intimidation, is becoming the foundation for the Russian Federation. While some dictators trade resources, ordinary workers are turned into expendable material. But even this resource is not infinite. The number of migration-related offenses is growing, while the number of foreigners legally residing in the country is steadily decreasing. The Kremlin is destroying its own labor market, replacing it with forced labor camps. And the most ironic result of Putin's policies: there has been a surge in marriages between local Russian women and citizens of India. Against the backdrop of war and the mass exodus of men from the country, there is now a catastrophic shortage on the marriage market. It seems that the local Ivans have either perished at the front or are hiding underground, so Russian brides are increasingly seeking salvation and stability with Indian grooms. This is a vivid conclusion to the story of the Russian world. The country that shouted the loudest about the purity of traditions and greatness is ultimately losing its men and is left with an economy that relies on workers coming from North Korea. While some are being expelled due to xenophobia, others are becoming the Federation's last demographic hope. The import substitution of grooms is perhaps the only achievement of the Kremlin that actually works. While Russian brides are seeking salvation with Indian grooms, the Kremlin is in a panic over the blows from Ukrainian deep strikes. Drones have dealt a devastating blow to the Kremlin's main cash cow, oil exports. According to Bloomberg, in just 1 week, Russia's revenues from resource sales have plummeted by more than $1 billion due to attacks on the terminals in Primorsk and Ust-Luga, about the new terror from the beginning of 2025, and how precise strikes on ports are scorching the aggressor's economy. Watch further.
Drones have struck the Russian oil port of Ust-Luga for the 5th time in the past 10 days, reports Reuters. On the morning of March 31st, the governor of Leningrad Oblast, Alexander Drozdenko, reported damage at the port. Ust-Luga is called the Baltic Gateway of Russia. It is the largest Russian port through which significant volumes of crude oil and petroleum products are exported, including with the use of shadow fleet vessels. Attacks on Ust-Luga will have consequences, direct losses for Russia in foreign currency earnings.
These mysterious and previously unknown friendly drones, which managed to reach the remote Dolan region with such incredible and unexpected speed, effectively and decisively put an immediate end to all of the lingering hopes that the people there had been desperately clinging to for so long. In order to generate rapid financial gains, including by strategically capitalizing on the significant reductions, or complete cancellations recently announced by Trump, of a series of specific and stringent restrictions. that he is alleged to have officially imposed on the continuous supply of Russian industrial raw materials to India. So right now, as a result, the substantial growth in oil and gas revenues will actually turn out to be considerably more modest than initially anticipated.
As a result of Ukrainian strikes on the infrastructure and logistics facilities of the aggressor country, the Kremlin has already lost up to 45% of its oil exports and nearly 40% of its monthly missile production volume. This was calculated by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine.
Russia is waging an ideological war against Ukraine. Putin's regime pursues exclusively imperial ideological goals. Accordingly, the simple scenarios that some call mutual concessions, supposedly capable of bringing peace in an instant, are part of the fog of war and lies. Russia's clear goal today is to continue its aggression, and this goal will only change when resources start to run out. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Long-range sanctions by Ukraine's defense forces directly hit the Kremlin's key sources of income. A record budget deficit, skyrocketing inflation, and systemic problems in virtually every sector of the economy. This is the reality that can no longer be ignored. Moscow saw the escalation in the Middle East as an opportunity. The president of Ukraine is confident that, unlike the Russian dictator, the leaders of the countries in the region are not interested in a prolonged confrontation.
As of today, I am certain that Russia is interested in a prolonged war. It is benefiting from this. The United States is focused on the Middle East, which means a reduction in military support for Ukraine. In addition, the sanctions have been eased, partially, but still eased. And Russia is beginning to grow economically. I see only advantages for Moscow because it does not care about human lives, especially when it comes to non-Russian lives. Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, in an interview with Axios.
Ukraine's operational and strategic capabilities to inflict more and more damage on Russia. These losses are causing serious concern even within the Russian ultra-nationalist community. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War note, failures in air defense, in other words, Moscow's simple inability to protect its key assets, are accompanied by failures at the front.
A well-known Russian ultra-nationalist blogger who writes about military topics complained that Russian troops will not be able to change the unfavorable situation on the battlefield in the coming months, and that Ukraine's rather successful counterattacks have undermined Russia's ability to conduct offensive operations in 2026, according to a report by the Institute for the Study of War.
Europe must increase pressure on the aggressor country, said EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas.
Time and again, we see Ukraine demonstrating its desire for peace while Russia intensifies its attacks. And we understand that pressure must be applied to the aggressor, not the victim. There will be no lasting peace unless Russia is subjected to pressure. To put an end to this war, we must confront Moscow, not encourage it. We should not ease restrictions, but tighten them. The 20th package of sanctions is ready for approval, and we will tighten the noose even further, especially around Russia's shadow fleet.
But Brussels and Washington would be much stronger if they acted in coordination and applied pressure on Russia together, noted Kaja Kallas. Karina Loloyan for Freedom TV channel.
While oil billions are burning away in the tanks, Russia's economy has officially hit rock bottom. Rostat has acknowledged that more than a third of companies are operating at a loss, and Putin has already gone to the oligarchs with his handout. In order to somehow plug the holes in the military budget, billionaire Deripaska has proposed bringing back a labor gulag with 12-hour workdays. How Russians are being turned into near slaves to save the sinking regime and continue the war. More on this in the following report.
94% of Russian food service establishments are operating on the brink of profitability or at a loss. This is evidenced by the results of a survey conducted by Action Accounting, which included more than 500,000 companies across Russia. Almost a third of respondents, 31%, reported losses. Another 36% reported low profits, and 26% said their business situation was unstable.
Let's start with Volgograd. Since January 1st, 8 establishments have closed down. According to the media just yesterday, in the central district of the city, only one was still operating. Yesterday, I walked past a place that opened 2 months before we did. Well, it's not operating anymore, even though they made a lot of noise when they opened. They made a name for themselves, but when I checked Avito, everything is up for sale. In Moscow, 45 restaurants have closed since January 1st. In addition to this, the VT chains are also shutting down.
Major companies are also facing serious difficulties. For example, the supermarket chain Magnit, which has more than 32,000 stores in 72 regions of the Federation, according to the Moscow Times, ended 2025 with a loss of 22.5 billion rubles. This is the first negative financial result in more than 20 years of operation, and the main reason cited is the debt burden. Due to the high key interest rate, the company's loan servicing costs increased by 74%, reaching almost 164 billion rubles per year. And almost all entrepreneurs are reporting a decline in profits. Pressure on businesses inevitably affects consumers in the form of rising prices.
The cheapest butter, 100 grams, is 154.99, and good Vickers Notable butter is already 300. That's what the prices are like.
And these are not shortcomings in individual sectors, analysts note, but evidence of a systemic crisis in the Russian economy. For the first time, as many as 74 Russian regions ended the year with a budget deficit, and there is nothing to compensate for them with. Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service reported that the Federation's gold reserves in 2026 dropped to their lowest level. In the last 4 years, the financial reserves of the aggressor country are being depleted due to Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine, sanctions and strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces on strategic targets within Russian territory. Russia's budget deficit in 2026 has already reached about $100 billion.
The cumulative deficit there already exceeds 15 trillion rubles, so if you divide by 80, you get the figure in dollars. And accordingly, this huge deficit, which the government no longer knows how to cover, and they say the only option to cover it is to cut spending. And by the way, in February, even though the year had just started, the Russian government was planning to carry out what is called a sequestration, that is to limit budget spending.
The Russian government is considering various options to solve its financial problems, but none of them promise anything good for ordinary citizens. For example, in order to save the budget, the head of the Federation Council Committee on Budget and Financial Markets, Anatoly Artemonov, suggested that the government members of the Kaluga region eliminate nursing homes. Or here's another, so to speak, promising initiative. Oligarch Oleg Deripaska proposed that Russians switch to a 6-day work week. But that's not all. In his opinion, the schedule needs to be changed. Instead of 8 hours, people should work.
We are looking at 12 full hours every single day. This means working from 8 o'clock in the morning all the way until 8 o'clock in the evening. This schedule includes Saturday as well. The faster we can focus and do this work, the sooner we will all finally get through this entire difficult transformation process together. Oleg Deripaska, founder of Russia's largest metallurgical holding, Rusal, from a publication in the Moscow Times. Well,
for now, the key sectors that used to fill the Russian treasury continue to collapse before our eyes. For example, due to sanctions and the withdrawal of foreign partners, the ferrous metallurgy industry has lost access to technology and is rolling back decades, according to the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service. Currently, modernization in the sector has been suspended. Banks are refraining from providing financing amid instability, and enterprises are maintaining liquidity out of fear of new shocks. Nikita Skoblikov for Freedom TV channel. And
there's more to come. The United Kingdom is launching a maritime hunt for the Kremlin's shadow fleet, intercepting oil tankers right in its own waters. Canada has added another 100 Russian vessels to its sanctions lists, completely blocking Moscow's routes for circumventing restrictions. While the aggressor frantically seeks salvation through India, the noose around Putin's oil revenues is tightening to the limit. All the details will be shared by our colleagues.
Canada has added another 100 tankers from Russia's shadow fleet to the sanctions list, stated Foreign Minister Anita Anand ahead of the G7 meeting in France. In total, Canada has already imposed sanctions on more than 600 vessels from the shadow fleet. To increase pressure on the Kremlin, the United Kingdom will intercept and inspect tankers carrying sanctioned oil in its waters. In response, the Russian embassy in London began to threaten that Russia would, supposedly, take all necessary measures to protect its national interests. Intercepting vessels is a blow to the Kremlin, which uses the fleet to finance attacks on Ukraine, the UK Ministry of Defence stated.
We have seen that the joint measures we, together with other allies, have taken against shadow shipping have helped reduce Russia's oil revenues by a quarter. We can do more. And today's confirmation to the Prime Ministers that we are ready to do more, that we have the legal and military capabilities, is a signal to Putin that he will not be able to send his illegal sanctioned vessels through British waters in the future, without the risk that we will seize them. John Healey, UK Defence Minister, in an interview with Sky News.
While Europe imposes new sanctions and detains tankers, Moscow is restoring energy cooperation with India. The countries are preparing to resume direct supplies of liquefied natural gas for the first time since the start of Russia's war against Ukraine, writes Reuters. A verbal agreement has already been reached at the ministerial level. According to 3 sources familiar with the discussions, officials have also agreed to further increase crude oil sales to India, which could double compared to January's level and account for about 40% of India's total imports in roughly a month.
Any tanker that is currently en route, any Russian tanker heading into the area from Indochina to the Indian zone to the South China Sea, these tankers are all carrying oil that is actually being sold at a very good price. The longer the war in the Persian Gulf continues, the more money Putin will make. This needs to be understood absolutely clearly. And today's desire of Starmer, today's desire of Britain to start pursuing the shadow tanker fleet, this is directly related to the fact that amid a local shortage, the Russians are selling oil at much higher prices than usual.
Despite new agreements with India, about 40% of Russia's oil export capacity has been put out of commission as a result of Ukrainian attacks and the detention of tankers from Russia's shadow fleet, Reuters reports. This is the most serious disruption of oil supplies in the history of modern Russia. After Ukrainian drone attacks on export ports in the Baltic Sea, oil shipments were interrupted, and at the export port in Novorossiysk, shipments are being carried out below planned levels.
Please continue to put pressure on Russia. Its tankers and shadow fleet should not feel safe in European waters. I thank Denmark, Sweden, and France for detaining these vessels. This is a clear demonstration that enforcement of the rules is not only possible, but also effective. Now we need to go further. These tankers should not just be stopped. Their use to circumvent international law must not be allowed. We urgently need international action to create strong legal frameworks in Europe that will allow countries to block Russian tankers and confiscate oil shipments.
Estonian intelligence has noted that the consequences of Ukrainian strikes on ports in the Leningrad region have effectively halted Russian oil exports along this route.
This is undoubtedly a serious blow for Russia, since the Russian Federation exports 40 to 50% of its oil products through the ports of Ust-Luga and Primorsk. At the very least, in the short term, this will significantly affect Russia's revenues, especially as the ice recedes in the Baltic Sea. And higher oil prices would have allowed these ports to be used even more actively and profitably. Ukraine chose a very opportune moment for the strike. At least temporarily, Russia's revenues from oil exports will decrease, and therefore, so will the funding of its war against Ukraine.
Despite Moscow's attempts to redirect exports and maintain revenues through new markets, the pressure of sanctions, strikes on infrastructure, and restrictions on the operation of the shadow fleet are having a tangible effect. The reduction in oil revenues directly affects the Kremlin's ability to finance the war against Ukraine, which means further strengthening of sanctions and monitoring their enforcement remain key tools for containing Russian aggression. Karina Lolayan for Freedom TV channel. And
what do you think about these events? Share your thoughts in the comments, leave a like, and stay up to date with the main news. Stay with us, there's even more interesting content ahead.